Speaking of how when cultures come together, they normally clash, do you think the latest migration of Mexicans into the United States will lead to greater diversity across the nation, or do you think they'll actually stay in places that they already are, like Texas and California?
Well, we had a huge surge of migration, generally not predicted, by the way, of people from Mexico and Latin America. And 60% of Latin migrants were from Mexico, basically from 1982 to 2007. Made possible by some of the provisions of the 1965 Immigration Act, but generally not predicted. The experts said, well, immigrants won't come from Latin America or Asia. Immigrants come from Europe, as they had in the past. This has caused some cultural conflict. You've had very large masses of people from Mexico and Latin America in cities like Los Angeles on the West Coast and in big cities in Texas. You've had many of these people working hard and moving upward economically. Their children have tended to learn English, but the upward mobility has been a little disappointing in the third generation, more so than I had expected. There's a resemblance here between this big Latin migration and the migration of people from Eastern and Southern Europe 100 years ago, from the opening of the Ellis Island Immigration Station in 1892 till World War I, and then for a few years thereafter until it was shut off by the 1924 Immigration Act. But none of those groups were as large a percentage of the migration. You had different language groups. You had Poles and Jews, Serbs and Slovaks, Southern Italians and Greeks. In the Ellis Island period, this period, you had an awful lot of Spanish language people. And there have been, we've also had more illegal immigration. So some 11 million estimated illegals in the United States today. And naturally that sparks some protest because people in America generally believe in the rule of law, and some people have said, well, we should deport all of them. Others have said we should legalize them. Others want measures in between. This has posed some conflict. Interestingly, Latin migration, not just in California, Texas, and Florida, but has fanned out in the first decade of the 21st century to fast-growing places like Atlanta, Georgia, Charlotte, Raleigh, North Carolina, Nashville, Tennessee, areas that never had any immigrants to speak of in the 19th century, the Ellis Island period, different destinations. Immigration from Mexico, according to the Pew Hispanic Center, net migration from Mexico to the United States since 2007 has been zero. Unexpectedly, this migration just stopped. Partly that's a response to economic incentives. The housing collapse resulted in lack of layoffs in construction jobs and so forth. I think another factor was that people's dreams were shattered. Many of these people bought houses under government preferential programs that gave Hispanics mortgages on very flimsy basis in terms of creditworthiness. If you look at the foreclosures in the period after the housing price collapse, I estimate about a third of them were Hispanic. And these people's dreams were shattered. And so I think that for Latin Americans now, the United States looks less like a dream, and Mexico, or their home country, looks less like a nightmare in many cases. And so I predicted that we won't see a wave of migration from Latin America to the U.S. of the magnitude that we saw in 1982-2007. There will still be some migration for sure, but not of that huge magnitude that we had.